Okay, this is a reaction video. This is from Lost in the Pond. 7 TV shows I only saw after moving to America. Now, I've seen some British shows. Obviously, you've seen Monty Python's. That was big during the day when I was growing up. And Faulty Towers with John Cleese was always a favorite amongst my mom and brother. And Chef was another good show that might with Lenny Henry. And Coupling was a show that I really enjoyed as well. But let's see, seven TV shows I only saw after moving to America. This is Lawrence from Lost the Pond. Please click like, share, and subscribe for him, and please click like, share, and subscribe for me.
Yet another product of America's public television that I don't remember seeing in Britain, which is weird because we're obsessed with cardigans.
I have no idea what shows he's talking about, so this will be interesting.
Hello, this video is sponsored by BritBox, the premier streaming service for Britain's most beloved shows. I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to TV shows. Specifically TV shows that I hadn't even heard of until I moved to the United States. And in many respects that's quite a statement because we get a lot of American television in Britain. We get most of the major sitcoms, the dramas, science fiction shows, cartoons, reality TV, pro wrestling, and crucially, MacGyver. And so because of that wide importation of American television, it was blooming hard to come up with
I watched a few of those shows, not all of them.
The list for this video. But there are specific TV shows that I really did only encounter after moving to America. And since I've been under the weather these last few days, watching television is about all I've done, you know, even in my sleep. So while it's on my mind, here are 7 TV shows that I only discovered after moving to the United States.
Yeah, Jeopardy, that's a game show where you have to answer in the form of a question. So, like, if they say, like, well, no, I'm not going to go there. Well, maybe I should go there. Biggest failure as a national football club. You would respond, what is the English national team? That's how you respond in the form of a question. Now, that's a joke. I'm just making a little joke. Please don't take it seriously. You can put your comments in the below. I know we play it in the World Cup, but that's basically what Jeopardy is.
Ah, Jeopardy. You know, it took me a long time to work out what on earth was going on whenever somebody would put this on in the background. It was never a case with this show that I sat down glued to the television to see what would happen next. I just saw people answering answers with questions, and it just seemed really weird to me and jarring, and also unlike anything else I'd ever seen. But the really sort of weird thing, I think, about Jeopardy is it's become a big part of the cultural conversation in America. There are Jeopardy memes.
That was Alex Trebek, who's recently passed away.
Alex Trebek parodies. And before I became this full-time YouTube sensation, I worked in regular...
I'm still working to be a YouTube sensation, and you can help me with that by clicking like, share, and subscribe.
Jobs, and in those regular jobs, presumably to improve camaraderie and morale, management would have us play the game Jeopardy and ultimately ruin it by making it work related. But the point is, I learned that Jeopardy was, and of course still is, a big part of the American psyche. Now, while doing research for this video, I discovered that Jeopardy actually had a British version, 3 of them to be precise, one in the early 80s, one in the early 90s, and one in the mid 90s. And I don't remember any of them, especially the one in the early 80s, because I was 13.
Must not have taken off over there.
Months. None of the British versions ever ran more than 2 years, which leads me to wonder if any of the executives got together and said, I fear this show may be in jeopardy.
Yeah, that's good.
Sorry about that.
The joy of painting. I think I know what to talk about here, but I'm going to find out.
Oh, this might be my favorite American show ever made.
Yes, that's the one. He goes there and he paints these views. I mean, it's really became a very popular show. Now, he's no longer with us, this guy, I forget what his name is. But, yeah, The Joy of Painting. I was on the public broadcasting channel, and he had an incredible voice when he talked, when he painted.
It's another show that has sort of entered the meme world of the internet and is just a big part of the cultural conversation here around afros. But if you're British and you've never seen this show, I advise you to check it out. It was hosted by this man, the late Bob Ross. Max,
That's looks like Garfunkel from Simon and Garfunkel.
can we fix this, please? Thank you.
Yeah, that's him.
thank you. This man, the late Bob Ross, and there are two enduring qualities about him. Firstly, his calm demeanour is just extraordinary while he's painting his landscapes, and he always says things like, let's just add some happy trees or some happy meals. It was never sponsored by McDonald's, right? And then he'd do this thing. He'd take hold of his brush, not his hair, but an actual paintbrush, and he'd just smack it against the thing to just knock it off, and it was just so cathartic. Everything about this show is super cathartic. You might almost say that he puts the art in cathartic. But back in Britain, about the same time when I was growing up in the 80s, we had several art-themed shows for kids, including Heartbeat with Tony Hart and Art Attack, because who doesn't love cardiovascular humour? So I suppose it would have been overkill to throw Bob Ross in there, which is not a sentence I thought I'd ever say about anything. But in discovering the show, I have become a happy Lawrence. Oh dear, now Lawrence has to admit something.
Yeah, that's one thing that Americans do like. I don't know if it's caught on over there or if it's big over there like it is over here, but Americans do enjoy antiques.
Very personal. I like the Antiques Roadshow, right? Shut up. But I didn't know until I moved to America that there's an American version of it. Let me back up, right? Growing up in Britain, the Antiques Roadshow, which just like in America, is a show in which people bring on their antiques and have them evaluated for their modern day.
Yeah, I didn't know they had this show in Great Britain. I knew they had it in America. I didn't know they had it over there. So maybe you guys like antiques. Well, I think you figured you guys would like antiques.
Worth. And in Britain, you weren't very cool if you were into this show. And so that's why I used to watch it ironically and to secretly derive joy from people trying to mask their disappointment when they're told that their Edwardian chandelier will only fetch about 50 quid. But I'm older now. I'm 40. That's the official age at which you suddenly start watching the Antiques Roadshow without irony. And so I did just a few weeks ago. The American version, which is based on the British version, they host it from like historic sites around the country. And the one I watched recently was in New Hampshire. And this one guy brought in a ship, you know, not a full-size ship. That would be mental.
Yeah, I think we got it. I think we know what you're talking about.
But a model ship that was over 100 years old, and he had the case and everything. And if that was me, I'd be caught in two minds. Do I sell this thing for tens of thousands of dollars, or do I just keep it on show at my house and be the envy of everybody?
Sell it.
I think that I'd go with that one.
Okay, The Price is Right. Used to be by Bob Barker. I don't think he's. I think he's passed away since. I think Drew Carey does it now. And The Price is Right is basically it's out in Los Angeles. You go into the studio audience. You have a big giant name tag, and they call your name. It's random that you might be called, and you go down there and you bid on prizes. And if you get it under without going over, then you win a lot of stuff. But The Price is Right.
Not every show on this list is a show that I personally love, all right? Some of them are just so loud and in your face that you can't...
Yeah, it is loud. It is in your face.
For me,
yeah.
That's The Price is Right. Now, I should clarify that I had heard of The Price is Right before moving to America. In fact, I'd seen it as a child. The British version. Specifically, the British version hosted in the 90s by Bruce Forsyth, known as Bruce's Price is Right. And one of the things that stood out to me about the British version of the show...
Again, I didn't know they had British versions of The Price is Right. This is interesting to me.
Is just how suspiciously excited all of the contestants were. You know, Bruce is all like, "Oh, come on down." And immediately those cultish tendencies start kicking in. Yay! It's like they're given tequila before they go on. Well, you're not going to believe this. It's even crazier in the US. You do believe that, don't you?
It is. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. The carefully orchestrated reaction of people is almost certainly the driving force behind that show's ratings. And as weird as it is, it's apparently a good formula, because The Price is Right continues to be a profitable show here in the US.
First time I saw The Price is Right was in the mid-'70s, and it's still going today.
Where it originated. That's right. Unbeknownst to me, it was an American show that inspired those British variants.
Yeah, soap operas, not as big as they used to be, but there used to be a whole slew of shows like Days of Our Lives, General Hospital, and those were the titles. And they were just soap operas. You watch them, and if you had a mother who was a stay-at-home mom, she'd call them My Stories.
Soap operas, I would say, are a bit of a dividing line between British and American culture. Sure, I mean, soap operas on either side of the Atlantic will have that one character that will say something like, "Ooh, my husband Jim died."
If you've ever seen George Carlin's comedy, he always says there's always a doctor coming along in these shows. And that's true, generally, for the most part.
Died in a motorcycle accident again. They're really depressing, is what I'm saying. But I've come to find that British people are more of a glutton for that kind of thing than Americans are. While British soaps aren't as popular as they used to be, they are still watched in the millions and millions, and for that reason can justify an evening slot. Whereas in America, nobody I know watches American soaps. Right? I couldn't even name these without looking them up. You've got Days of Our Lives, The Bold and the Beautiful, The Young and the Restless, and General Hospital, which is ironic because the only
I was able to name 2 of them.
time you'll ever see.
Now, there used to be a lot more as well than that. They used to start around like after the midday news at 12:30, and they'd go through like 4 o'clock, and each station would have their own soap opera to watch. But there's not so many anymore. But those are the soap operas.
See an American soap opera is while you're in the hospital. And there's been the suggestion that in the US, soap operas are reserved more or less for the over 65s. Whereas, growing up in Britain, I remember when the previous night's EastEnders episode would be the topic of conversation on the playground. It's like, we already know who Phil Mitchell is by the second trimester.
Now, I'm familiar with this. This is Rick Steves' Europe, and he goes around to different countries, different cities, and tells you about it. And you can watch it on YouTube as well.
In the first few months of moving to another country, you find yourself scrambling for things that remind you of home. And for me, it was Rick Steves' Europe and Cadbury Mini Eggs. For those of you who don't know, Rick Steves is an American travel host who spent a lot of time in Europe. Right, his shows and his books have given Americans great insight into what Europe is actually like, as opposed to what it's like on Twitter. And I'll be honest, my gateway into this was an episode in which he visited Britain. And it was great because he didn't just stick to London. It was like, ooh, here I am in the beautiful Lakes District.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to ever go to England, I wouldn't just want to stay in London. I'd like to go see places like Leicester and Manchester and Liverpool. And now my brother's been to Liverpool before, and I said I always like to go to Liverpool, and he said, yeah, that's like saying you've been to Pittsburgh. I don't know if that's true or not. If you're in Liverpool, let me know if it's like that. But Newcastle, Southampton. I could go all over. Now I realize I'm naming football clubs in England too, or places where I know they have football clubs. But York. I'd like to see all of England, to be honest with you.
District. Join me later when I'll be herding sheep in the Cotswolds. And round about the time that I got introduced to the show, I was writing a travel blog of my own, and I joked with my wife, ooh, could you imagine me on his radio show? Well, imagine no more, because last year that weirdly became a reality.
This is Rick Steves. We're talking with British import Lawrence Brown. Knickers in.
Oh, there you go. You're on. Talking to a guy who you're promoting here. Very good, very good.
A twit.
The phrase is more like knickers in a twist. It's similar, actually, in a twist. Yeah, it's right. Similar to the American phrase panties in a bunch.
I chatted with Rick Steves for like an hour, and not just about underwear.
Yeah, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers is no longer with us, but Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. That was a children's TV show. Mr. Rogers, again, another guy who has a great voice. And everybody who grew up probably watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
And finally, what can I say? Mr. Rogers, a true American icon. I mean, where would we have been without him at the Battle of New York? It's the other Mr. Rogers, right. Yet another product of America's public television that I don't remember seeing in Britain, which is weird because we're obsessed with cardigans.
You also had Captain Kangaroo as well, but Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
But since moving to the US, I've discovered 3 things about Fred McFeely Rogers, to give him his full name, that really stand out. Firstly, of course, he was the host of a very popular show called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Secondly, I suppose he has the rare distinction of being universally loved among Americans. And thirdly, his entire character was based on the actor Tom Hanks. I don't really see the resemblance. But he seemed to be full of sage advice for children who he'd often have on his show. And during what are increasingly becoming precedented times.
If you ever were a fan of Eddie Murphy, he does something called Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood, which is a takeoff on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which is hysterical.
I often hear Americans say things like, I wish Mr. Rogers was around today. And I can see what they're getting at by watching back old episodes on YouTube. He was like everyone's grandpa, and I never knew my own grandfathers. So I think if we'd have had an equivalent like that in Britain, which I don't think we really did, I probably would have gravitated toward Mr. Rogers, especially if he promised to send me free candy like actual granddads. But while I was only introduced to him in my my adult years. My wife grew up watching him as a kid and absolutely adores him. And in hindsight,
yeah, a lot of people, a lot of kids grew up know who Mr. Rogers was and watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
It's sort of weird that we didn't get it in Britain. We did get some of America's other public television shows for kids, like Sesame
Street, The Electric Company.
And while I could understand the absence of Bob Ross due to the amount of art shows that we already had, we didn't really have a Mr. Rogers teaching us how to be good human beings. Saying that, we did have...
There was a show called The Electric Company, and Morgan Freeman played a character. I remember Easy Reader. I think there was also one, Vincent the Vegetable Vampire, that he did. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but I remember he was on Morgan Freeman. First time I ever saw him was on a TV show called The Electric Company.
Jeffrey from Rainbow, who taught us how to not be like whatever Zippy is. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Let me know in the comments below your favourite American TV show that I haven't discovered yet. I don't know how you'd know that. I'm Lawrence Brown. You can follow me on Twitter at LostInThePondUS, and do not forget to subscribe to my channel so that my videos don't get lost in the pond.
Yeah, this was interesting. It shows that he only saw after moving to America. Yeah, please click like, share, and subscribe for Lawrence, and please watch Lost in the Pond, and please do the same for me. This was interesting. I enjoyed this.
As always, a big shout out to my happy patron.
Yeah, happy to his patrons. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks for watching.